When last we heard from our intrepid hero Jerry Crew, it was Wednesday, August 27th, 1958, and Jerry had just found gigantic human-like footprints at his job site and reported his finding to the foreman. What comes next? Will Jerry keep working as the cat skinner? Will he find more footprints? Will Michael Willie win Podcaster of the Year at the Bigfoot Crossing Awards ceremony? At least some of these questions might be answered in today's episode. That's right, fellow babies. You have arrived at Bigfoot Crossing.
Good morning, fellow babies. A great day in store for you here in the metro area.
But the senator, while insisting he was not intoxicated, could not explain his nudity.
For hundreds of years, people from all walks of life have reported sightings of a large hairy animal walking on 2 feet. The scientific community has dismissed these sightings as hoaxes, hallucinations, or misidentified bears. But is there another option? Is it possible that there is an ape, the largest of the great apes, unrecognized and unclassified by modern science, roaming the forest of North America? Please join us as we seek the answer to this compelling question. You have arrived at the intersection of myth and science, of fact and folklore. You have arrived at Bigfoot Crossing.
Hey, fellow... Hey, fellow babies! You have arrived at the intersection of myth and science, of fact and folklore. And not a moment too soon, we're about to launch into our next episode. And it's long past due, don't you think? I'm Michael Willie, your guide on this ongoing expedition. Thanks so much for being with us here today at Bigfoot Crossing. I know you probably feel like I dropped off the face of the earth, and to tell you the truth, I kind of feel the same way. I am so sorry it's taken me so long to get this episode out, but we are back and raring to go. But first, let's take care of some housekeeping duties. First of all, I want to thank my good friend Daryl Williams for channeling his inner Hank Hill for the intro. If you need voice work, you can contact Daryl. His contact information is on the episode info page on bigfootcrossing.net. Second, I want to remind everyone that the Bigfoot Crossing coupon code, which is BFC15, and is found on the Bigfoot on the web store on bigfootcrossing.net, that coupon code isn't limited to books about Bigfoot or cryptozoology. The entirety of Hancock House's diverse catalog is available to Bigfoot Crossing listeners at a 15% discount. So be sure to check out that impressive lineup of books on hancockhouse.com. And third, mark your calendars for July 27th. Why, you ask? Well, that's the date for the 2024 Smoky Mountain Bigfoot Conference in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. Bigfoot Crossing will have a booth at the conference as a vendor. I'm excited to announce that our first generation Bigfoot Crossing t-shirts will be on sale at the conference, and the shirts will be available on the Bigfoot Crossing website after the conference. And by the way, if you haven't liked Bigfoot Crossing on Facebook yet, you can follow Bigfoot Crossing and get notified when new episodes are posted. You can also follow me on Twitter. I don't post a lot on Twitter, but it's at Michael B. Willie on Twitter, and on Facebook, it is facebook.com/@BigfootTennessee. And one final housekeeping matter before we leap into the podcast, and that's our website, bigfootcrossing.net. My webmaster did not understand the importance of having an SSL certificate for the website. And so if you visited the website, you were told that the site was not secure. Well, that's no longer the case. We have an SSL certificate in place, and you can now visit bigfootcrossing.net without any security concerns. I apologize for the problem and probably should fire my webmaster, but the webmaster is me. What are you going to do? You can't fire yourself, but I will do better in the future. And don't forget, while you're at the website, be sure to visit the Bigfoot Crossing web store.
Shameless plug.
And now, at long last, we are going to continue our discussion of that watershed foundational event in the history of Bigfoot, the publication in the Humboldt Times of the article about Jerry Crew's discovery and casting of large human-like footprints near Bluff Creek in Northern California. October 6th, 1958, a very slow news day, part 2. And class is in session. All right, fellow babies, as a reminder, as we are traveling down this path in history, and I make a point of, or I find an issue that I really want you to keep in mind, I will play this sound effect. Now, our last episode ended with a cliffhanger that would rival Who Shot JR?
Oh, really?
No, not really. Our cliffhanger doesn't even rival Who Shot John. But if you're listening to the mellifluous sound of my voice and are wondering who is JR and why would someone shoot him, well, the TV show Dallas debuted in 1978 as a primetime soap opera about a Texas oil family. Great cast. Veteran Western actor Jim Davis portrayed Jock Ewing, the family patriarch, and Barbara Bel Geddes, who played the matriarch of the family, was in the Hitchcock classic Vertigo with Jimmy Stewart. But wait, you've never seen Vertigo? Oh my gosh, it is a classic with a capital C, released in 1958. Initial reviews were mixed, but it is now considered to be one of the greatest films ever made. You have got to see Vertigo. You will thank me for it. Anyway, the character everyone loved to hate on Dallas was J.R. Ewing, the oldest son of the Ewing family. Played to an evil T by Larry Hagman. History.com describes J.R. Ewing as, quote, a greedy, conniving, womanizing scoundrel, end quote. I mean, the guy had no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And so, at the end of the second season, someone shot J.R. And since the third season didn't start till the fall of 1980, Americans had months to wonder about who shot JR, and CBS had months to build the anticipation. And on November 21st, 1980, 350 million people around the world tuned in to see who shot JR. A full 76% of the TV sets in the United States that were turned on November 21st, 1980 were tuned to Dallas. It's an amazing moment in television history. So, who shot JR? Well, since that episode is now 43 years old, I guess it won't hurt to tell you, but just in case.
Hey, stop listening. This is a big-time spoiler alert, and I will not be held responsible if you hear something you don't want to hear.
The shooter was Kristen Shepard, played by actress Mary Crosby. Kristen was JR's sister-in-law and mistress. That's right, JR was having an affair with his wife's sister. Told you, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. So the ending of our last episode doesn't really rival Who Shot JR, but we did leave you with a cliffhanger of a sort, because Jerry Crew had just found human-like footprints at his worksite and told his foreman, Wilbur Wallace, about it. And after some discussion, remember, Wilbur asked the men to get to work. Now, you remember that, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So, aren't you a little curious about what happened next?
Yeah!
All right, then. Well, you see, it's kind of like this. Nothing happened.
What? You're kidding, right?
Well, nothing happened immediately. As Marion T. Place states in her book On the Track of Bigfoot at page 35, quote, by the end of the week, all trace of the footprints on the Bluff Creek Road had been erased by the construction and a heavy rain. So no fresh tracks appeared. When Jerry Crew returned home that weekend, however, he found that the story of his discovery had preceded him. His neighbors and just about everybody else along the river and over the mountains were talking monster or wild man or ape. He had to weather a great deal of joshing. Fortunately, this lessened as the next few weeks passed without any more footprints being sighted anywhere in the region. End quote. But that all changed in mid-September. As Ivan Sanderson stated in his True Magazine article, quote, then, once again, these same monstrous footprints appeared overnight around the equipment and also farther down the road toward the valley and around a spring, end quote. Then Mrs. Jess Bemis, whose husband worked on the Bluff Creek Road construction crew, wrote a letter to Andrew Genzoli, regional editor of the Humboldt Times. Now that's right, fellow babies. It was Mrs. Bemis and not Jerry Crew who got the ball rolling with the Humboldt Times. Now, I don't have a copy of Mrs. Bemis's letter, but Marion T. Place includes much of the text of that letter in her book. So picking up on page 36 of On the Track of Bigfoot, Marion T. Place writes, quote, Mrs. Bemis began her letter. I am writing regarding a queer situation my husband has encountered at work. I have read your column a long time and have noticed that you often dig into things of various natures. This happened when my husband took a line clearing job up on Bluff Creek near Weichpeck. A rumor started among the men at once of the existence of a wild man. We regarded it as a joke. It was only yesterday that my husband became convinced that the existence of such a person is a fact, end quote. And there's a question mark in parentheses after the word person in her letter. Mrs. Bemis then went on to state, on their way to the job, the men found tracks going down the road. The tracks measured 14 to 16 inches in length. The toes were very short, but there were 5 to each foot. End quote. Mrs. Bemis also said that, quote, things such as fruit had been missed by the men camping on the job, end quote. And then she concluded by saying, quote, there are at least 15 men that will swear this is true, among them my husband. Have you heard of this wild man? Now, Genzoli reported on this letter in his RFD column on Sunday, September 28, 1958, under the heading of Someone Please Answer. Genzoli's column begins, quote, this letter came to me yesterday from Mrs. Jess Bemis of Salyer. I beg someone to give us an answer quickly, end quote. And then after quoting most of the letter, he concluded by admitting that he had not heard of this wild man, but added, quote, I wonder if anyone else knows about him. Please write, please help. Maybe we have a relative of the abominable snowman of the Himalayas, our own Wandering Willie of Weichpeck, end quote. In the September 25th issue of the Humboldt Times, Genzoli dedicated the entire RFD column to responses he had received about Mrs. Bemis's letter. Under the heading Now About Those Footprints, Genzoli summarized Mrs. Bemis's letter and then writes, quote, most of the experts, and there's quotes around experts, most of the experts around Eureka who can't tell the difference between a cow track and that made by a turkey swear that it is the work of a bear, end quote. And then Genzoli discussed a phone call from Larry Knudsen, who told of a group of workers who had likewise seen similar footprints. Genzoli points out that the workers were employees of the Simpson Company, not Wallace Brother employees. Quote, last spring they had noticed the huge tracks about 8 miles north of Corbell on the North Fork of the Mad River. These observers have long been acquainted with the out of doors, end quote. And Genzoli states that despite being, experienced outdoorsmen, these folks were all baffled by the tracks. And on page 38 on the track of Bigfoot, Marion T. Place is in all likelihood referring to Larry Knudsen, and I hope I'm saying his name right, maybe it's Knudsen, when she writes about Genzoli receiving a call from a, quote, logger working along the Corbell River. He and his friends had seen gigantic footprints there earlier in the spring, and despite the fact that they were all experienced woodsmen and hunters, they were positive the tracks were those of a human being, not an animal, end quote. Then Genzoli concluded the column by mentioning that the Del Norte County historian had sent him a copy of an article from the Del Norte County Record dated January 2nd, 1886. The article stated that a trustworthy citizen named Jack Dover, while out hunting, quote, saw an object standing 150 yards from him, picking and eating berries or tender shoots from the bushes. The thing was of gigantic size, about 7 feet, with a bulldog head, short ears, and long hair, end quote. The article goes on to state that Dover aimed his gun at the animal several times, but because it was so human-like, he would not shoot. Also, a number of people had seen the creature in the past, and their descriptions matched in all points except height. Some of the witnesses thought it was taller than 7 foot.
Wow.
Right? In the September 26th issue of the Humboldt Times, Andrew Genzoli again devotes much of his RFD column to footprints. Under the heading of Those Tracks Again, Genzoli discusses a phone conversation with Julian Paulus, one of the workers from the Mad River worksite. Now, Genzoli apparently had a habit of using incomplete sentences in his RFD column, so bear with me here as I try to share with you what Genzoli wrote. Quote, Julian Paulus is a very normal person, enjoys the out of doors, and knows something about it. So I'll take his word for fact. He knows those tracks 8 miles above Corbell in the woods area that were seen last spring. He described them as, quote, pretty heavy bird or animal, end quote. The impressions were found on the edge of a creek, and if you followed the path, it went over a 6-foot culvert into a freshly graded road. The tracks were sunken enough to indicate the weight of the object with the feet. Now a new angle. There were 3 toes straight out, a couple of smaller on the size. He thought the size of the foot 9 inches, maybe a little more. And he preferred to refer to the foot as a paw, end quote. Now, just the day before, on September 25th, Genzoli related his conversation, remember, with Larry Knudsen, who had described the prints as huge. Now we have Julian Paulus describing the foot or the track as a paw and estimating the size at 9 inches. Now, frankly, 9 inches just isn't a huge foot. I mean, the average adult male foot is around 10.5 inches.
Oh, really?
Yep. Isn't it amazing what you learn on this podcast?
Yeah, that's right.
So either Julian Paulus was underestimating the size of the tracks, or the other folks were overestimating. And we have no way of knowing either because no casts were made of those tracks and no pictures taken. Ginzoli went on to state that when word of the tracks spread at the job site, at least 25 people viewed the tracks at various times. And despite this, no one had ever seen such prints, nor knew what made them. Then Ginzoli included a note that he had received from Betty Allen, the Willow Creek correspondent for the Humboldt Times. Now, Betty quickly became one of my favorite people in this series of events. Betty writes, quote, "This wandering Willie is really a funny deal. I wish there was a way to get a plaster cast of his footprint. His tracks are real, and his using filled gasoline drums for playthings is a little unusual. Some of the men are keeping their guns handy at night, too, for a simple lock would mean nothing if he is as strong as one would suspect. One story is that they tracked him to a spot where he had apparently followed a deer and may have killed it. There are lots of other stories, too, believe me, hair raisers. A lot of them quite fictitious." End quote. Now, I find it interesting that even at this early point in the history of Bigfoot, people are already having to navigate between truth and tall tales. At any rate, at some point during this rather uneventful period, either independently or as a result of reading Betty's note in the RFD column, Jerry Crew reaches out to his friend, taxidermist Bob Titmus. And Bob gives Jerry plaster of Paris and instructions on how to cast footprints. And Jerry doesn't have to wait long to put Bob's instructions to use. Picking up on page 39 of On the Track of Bigfoot, Marion T. Place writes, quote, "Then, as unexpectedly as before, the unknown prowler appeared at the roadhead during the nights of October 1 and 2. Again, Jerry Crew saw the tracks first. They came down off the mountainside onto the roadway, circled the bulldozer, and continued on down and off the road to a small spring. Within hours after Crew reported to the foreman, 2 workmen quit and hastily moved their families out of the mountains." End quote. Ray Wallace, the road contractor, had several other projects under construction in the area, including at Mad River, and had heard rumors about the prowler everywhere he went. Ray's initial concern was that someone was trying to deliberately disrupt his operations at Bluff Creek. So when he heard a false rumor that all the workers at Bluff Creek had threatened to quit, Ray headed to Bluff Creek. Wilbur assured Ray that the rumor was false and showed Ray the footprints. Ray told Wilbur the tracks were animal tracks and set off to find a professional hunter. And Ray did just that. He hired 2 hunters to track down whatever was making these tracks. Ivan Sanderson discussed the hiring of these 2 men in the True Magazine article, and Sanderson said that Ray Wallace, quote, "brought in a man named Ray Kerr, who had read of the matter in the press and who had asked for a job on the road in order to be able to spend his spare time trying to track the culprit. Kerr brought with him a friend by the name of Bob Brasil, who had hunted professionally in Mexico and who owned 4 good dogs and a British-made gun of enormous caliber, which considerably impressed the local people. Kerr, an experienced equipment operator, did a full daily job. Brasil did not take a job, but only hunted," end quote. Now here's what Ivan Sanderson had to say in his book, Abominable Snowmen Legend Come to Life, about the employees who were quitting. Quote, Ray Wallace is a hard-boiled and pragmatic man, and he was already experiencing trouble keeping men on the job. Handpicked as they were, not a few had just had to leave for one apparently good reason or another. Only later did he learn that almost all of them did so not because they were scared by the Bigfoot, but either because their wives were or because of the ribbing they had to take when they went back to civilization, even for the evening, to nearby Willow Creek, end quote. But Jerry Crew was not one of the employees who quit. In fact, he would do something that would soon rock people's worlds. He would make plaster casts of some of the tracks. As Sanderson puts it in the True Magazine article, quote, this time Jerry Crew was prepared with a supply of plaster of Paris, and he made a series of casts of both right and left feet, end quote. Picking up at page 40 and 41 of On the Track of Bigfoot, Marion Place tells us, quote, on October 3rd, Jerry Crew did something which would cause a sensation later on. To stop people from ridiculing him, he made a plaster cast of one of the giant-sized barefoot tracks. After the cast hardened, he lifted it from the ground, carried it to his pickup truck, and laid it in a carton. When he showed the cast to his fellow workers, they did little more than raise their eyebrows. Those who remained on the job had realized by this time that the creature, whatever or whoever he was not disturbing them or their camp or their machinery. As long as he or it didn't make trouble, they would let him go his own way, end quote. So rather than being frightened by the maker of the tracks, the men had a live and let live attitude. This statement by Mrs. Place buttresses Ivan Sanderson's statement that the men who had quit did so not because they were frightened by the maker of the tracks, but for other reasons, and in all likelihood the reasons stated by Sanderson. Now, when Jerry Crew took his plaster cast home, he found that his family and neighbors shared his co-workers' so what, big deal attitude towards the casts. And by the way, so what, big deal is the last line of the fabulous movie The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. It's a cult classic with an amazing cast. Peter Weller, Jeff Goldblum, Ellen Barkin, John Lithgow, Christopher Lloyd, for crying out loud, Robert Ito, and one of my all-time favorite character actors, Vincent Schiavelli. Now, Vincent goes on to play the angry ghost who teaches Patrick Swayze how to move objects in the movie Ghost. Buckaroo Banzai also boasts one of the best soundtracks that was never released on an album. Well, legally anyway. If you have never seen it, you need to. Again, you will thank me for it. At any rate, I imagine Jerry Crew was a little disheartened by the so what big deal reaction to these track casts. But on Saturday, October 4th, Jerry went to Eureka on personal business. And picking up on page 41 of On the Track of Bigfoot, Mrs. Place writes, quote, when he showed friends the cast, their reactions were quite different. They became excited, summoned neighbors, and notified Mr. Genzoli at the newspaper. He and a staff photographer hastened to interview Jerry and photographed him with the cast in hand, end quote. Now, in his October 7th, 1958 RFD column for the Humboldt Times, Genzoli reports that when posing for his photograph, Jerry Crew refused when the photographer asked him to smile, saying, not on your life. If I did, someone would accuse me of trickery. So on Sunday, October 5th, 1958, the article was front page news in the Humboldt Times, complete with the picture of Jerry holding his cast. And wonder of wonders, not really, because like I've said, it was a really slow news day, The wire services picked up the story, and it spread like wildfire across the nation on October 6th, and Bigfoot became a permanent fixture in American culture. And just like that, fellow babies, history is made. And you might be thinking, yeah, well, but what else happened? You know, that's a fair question. And we will answer that question in the next episode.
What?
That's right, fellow babies. In our next episode, we will look at the aftermath of this historic event. Hey now. Don't be mean. We don't have to be mean, because remember, no matter where you go, there you are. Ha! That is also a quote from The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the Eighth Dimension. You have got to see that film. All right, fellow babies, that's another episode in the can. I want to give a big shout out and a big thank you to Lauren in the reference department at the Humboldt County Public Library. Lauren did a great job of tracking down articles for me in the library's microfilm archives of the Humboldt Times. These episodes would not have been possible without her work and research. Now be sure to join us right here at Bigfoot Crossing for our next episode as we continue our discussion of this watershed event and its aftermath. October 6th, 1958, a very slow news day, part 3. All right, fellow babies, there's the bell. Thanks so much for being with us here today at Bigfoot Crossing. Now get out of here.
We hope you have enjoyed your visit with us here at Bigfoot Crossing. The internet home for Bigfoot Crossing can be found at www.bigfootcrossing.net. Michael Willie's website, Bigfoot in Tennessee, can be found at www.tnbigfoot.net. Please follow us on Facebook at Bigfoot Tennessee. You can also follow Michael Willie on Twitter. His handle is at Michael B. Willie. Each episode of Bigfoot Crossing is posted to the Bigfoot Crossing YouTube channel. Please subscribe so you can be notified when new episodes are posted. Your feedback is always welcome. Please email questions and comments to tnsasquatch@gmail.com. Be sure to let us know which episode you have a question or comment about. Thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time right here at Bigfoot Crossing.
This is Brock Whitmore, live on the scene. Sir, did you see what happened?
Yeah, did.